Jeez. Okay, let me call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency meeting for today, Wednesday, January 27th. Please rise. Get Supervisor Saragosa to lead us in the pledge.
Please follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, roll call.
Chair Mulhart.
Here.
Director Craven. Here. Director Zaragoza.
Here.
Director Kelly.
Here. Sam McIntyre is in the audience as an alternate, and I don't see any other alternates. Okay. Any changes on the agenda?
One slight change. You should have in front of you a letter from Mr. Bellrock. Came in too late. We had some correspondence with it. We'd like to go ahead and add that. And it will be presented for consideration next month's meeting.
Okay. Public comments, opportunity for the public to address the board on GMA issues. Rob
Saperstein for the City of Oxnard, and Supervisor Zaragoza may be interested in this. Wasn't sure if it was going to come up in the context of the OPUG report from the executive officer. Just wanted to report for the city, they reached a major milestone in December for the GREAT program. Fully funded the advanced water purification facility and let the contract for the facility, so they've already had pre-construction meetings, and there will be recycled water from the GREAT program by 2012-ish. So it is a major milestone for the city.
Can we say great?
You can say great multiple times now.
Yes. I thank you so much for that. I was there for the ribbon cutting the other day, and it was raining and so forth, but they had it inside the one of the warehouses there, and we had some dirt that they took in there, but it was great. I think it was 21 million or 20 million, I think, is the amount that
for a portion of the AWPF, but we're on our way. So
very good. Mike.
Mike Solomon, United Water Conservation District. Just following up what Rob said, tomorrow at our office we have Jeff Pratt and some of his staff. I don't know who. We have Kaigas, Don Kendall, we have my staff, and we have Ken Ortega and his staff from Oxnard. We're meeting about the GREAT program to start coordinating how are we going to best take advantage of this as a group in the Ventura County. So we're moving forward on that, and we're looking forward to that meeting also.
Okay, very good. Anybody else have any non-agenda items? Okay, board member comments? Anybody? Just a real quick, let me ask, Steve, where are we to date on our rainfall, percentage-wise?
Actually didn't look, but I think we're just a little above normal.
Okay, all right. And then let the record show that Director Orchard's here. Okay, let's go to the consent items.
Move the approval.
Okay, a motion to approve.
Second.
And a second. Any questions? All right.
Mr. Chair, I'll abstain from the approval of the minutes.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none and one abstention. Okay. Informational items. Who's going to cover that? Brian.
For the record, Brian Bondi, United Water, Fox Canyon GMA. We had intended on having one of these quarterly water supply project updates that we initiated last year. We had hoped to have Kaigas present to give you an update on their projects and tie-ins with issues with the GMA, but unfortunately Mr. Gromley fell ill yesterday and could not attend, so we'll reschedule that at a later date.
Move to receive and file the report in the packet.
Okay. Motion to receive and file.
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Okay. Item 5. Rick.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, members of the board. For the record, my name is Rick Viergoots, and I'll be presenting item number 5 today, approach for addressing noncompliance from 2009. You may recall in 2008 and then in 2009 we had a number of compliance issues that we brought to your board, including meter calibration, retroactive irrigation efficiency, unregistered wells, and some unpaid pump charge accounts. And we had good results in 2009 handling a lot of these issues, but we didn't get to them all. There's about 25 that will be carried over into 2010, and so those have now become 2010 issues that we need to deal with. The purpose of today's presentation is to discuss modifying our approach. We used civil penalties a lot last year to compel compliance with good results, but we found that at some point the effectiveness of that trails off. So we want to talk to you about some other ideas today. Later this year, I did want to just let you know that ultimately we'd like to update the agency's penalty structure to make it more efficient and make it run a little bit smoother for us. These types of enforcement cases that we've dealt with this last year have taken quite a bit of staff effort. So this is a brief rundown of what's being carried over into 2010. We've got about 10 owner-operators that still have not complied with the meter calibration requirements, about 12 owners who are still slow to get their wells registered or who just prefer not to do it, and we've got about 4 unpaid groundwater extraction accounts that are moving forward into 2010. Common denominators with all these over the last year or so, it was all handled on an ad hoc basis, which isn't necessarily bad, it's just not always efficient. You'll probably remember we had a lot of discussions about meter calibration, a number of resolutions, finally settling on the last one, which was Resolution 2009-2. We had a number of discussions and actually a board item regarding retroactive irrigation efficiency. Also, we've had some discussions about unpaid pump charge accounts and unregistered wells. So we've handled these as they've come up, done on an ad hoc basis. The other thing that we've done is we've moved almost essentially to using certified mail when we send these letters out. And we're also validating the addresses with the county tax assessor's records. We had some problems early last year with not getting the letters to the right property owners, so we fixed that. Despite all this, some owners and operators still fail to respond to the letters, or they still fail to pay the penalties. So it's not always effective, and again, it's a high level of staff effort. There are some differences. A number of the new 2010 issues are strictly about remitting payment, a penalty, a civil penalty for failure to install or calibrate a flow meter. Other issues regard remitting payment and actually doing something, like installing a flow meter or registering a well. This next slide will just briefly go over what's in the existing ordinance 8.1. These generally mirror what's in the agency's enabling legislation. Last year we primarily relied on section 8.3 and the levying of civil penalties, but like I mentioned, at some point the increasing civil penalties don't seem to be effective. One of the things we'll talk about today is some things that are authorized under section 8.4, and specifically 8.4 allows the agency to file legal actions. It can allow us to refer these collection cases to collection agencies, and we believe it also will allow us to file liens on property for unpaid charges. So today we're seeking your direction on how to proceed with these issues that are now carrying over into 2010. Pages 3 and 4 of the staff report discuss these in a little more detail regarding meter calibration, unregistered wells, and owners and operators failing to pay extraction charges. Regarding meter calibration, We think it may be appropriate for agency counsel to further investigate the facts of these cases in more detail and, if appropriate, move forward with filing a petition with the Superior Court to compel compliance and collect the civil penalty. Regarding unregistered wells, we think it might be appropriate to follow the approach that we used for the meter calibration last year. With the meter calibration last year, we sent out, the board adopted a resolution with specific deadlines in it for compliance and also specific tiered civil penalties for failure to comply. We think an approach like that would work well for the unregistered wells. There's likely a similar economic benefit of non-compliance for those regarding delayed costs and avoided fees. And with owners and operators failing to pay extraction charges, we have 4 of those that come to mind right off the bat. 3 of them are being represented by counsel. There's a 4th that, to my knowledge, isn't being represented by counsel and will probably continue to pose a problem for the agency collecting payment for the extraction charges. So with those, we may find that ultimately we want to just refer those to a collection agency. In conclusion, we've got about approximately 25 owner-operators that continue to present ordinance compliance issues for 2010. We believe it's now appropriate to try different tools. We've proposed some solutions, and we're seeking your direction on how to proceed. Ultimately, we will need to make the process more efficient, and we think that we can do that as part of the ordinance update, which we hope to accomplish this year. And that's it. I can answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, do any members have any questions for Rick? Yeah, John.
You said you delivered the notices to the individuals by registered mail and some other means. Have we hand-delivered, to those individuals those letters?
No, we have not hand-delivered any letters.
To make sure that they really got them, or because I think you mentioned initially that they were sent to different addresses where the non-owner addresses and so forth. So I'm just wondering if that was another attempt to get those letters to the individuals to have them comply, with the ordinance.
It's a fine idea. We haven't tried hand delivering letters, no.
Okay, Mike?
Rick, as recently as about a week ago, a person that I have a good level of respect for, and a family that's been here since probably 1800, told me that he has a well. He's received 4 times communication about a well that he doesn't think exists. And he calls in and talks to staff, and then shortly thereafter the answer is to get another similar letter. And so he approached me on what should he do. And I suggested maybe he might want to try to call you specifically. I don't know if that's occurred or not. But it seems like we still don't quite have, a back and forth that seems to be working, and I'm not so sure it's all on their end. Because he reported that he'd called and had a personal conversation with a staff member, and it didn't result in, a letter saying, gee, prove us you don't have it or something else, But, his family has owned the property since before commercial well drilling existed, so unless it's a hand-dug well that was done by the Indians, he doesn't know about it.
Yeah, well, that'd be terrific if he would call me. I think that's a fine idea. I don't know specifically who it is, but I'm sure we could clear it up.
It just seemed like it was kind of an unusual conversation and somebody that I really do have respect for. So
that does seem unusual.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Dave, did you? Okay. Charlotte?
Well, I'll talk as long as I can, which won't be very long today. You'll be happy about that. In the spirit of justice, in the spirit of being even-handed, we need to proceed and do something. If we investigate and find there aren't wells, then we drop that one and go on with fewer cases, but they all need to be dealt with. In my city with utilities, we turn everything after 45 days over to collection agencies, and we have a less than 3% delinquency rate as a result of that, but we've been doing it even-handedly for 25 years or so. I think eventually we will get to where we don't have the problem. We just have to either rein in or address or solve the ones that are still existing. We're down to 26, as I counted. I think you said 25. On the positive side, look at how many people are complying with this, and I think that's really good. So I believe we need to proceed probably in the ways that staff has suggested.
If you go back through this process, from the time we said years ago you got to put meters on, then we went through the process of calibrating the meters, then we've gone through the process of registering wells. I think if you look through the history of what staff and the board have tried to do to be even-handed, we have given a long period of time for people to come into compliance. And ultimately, we've narrowed the funnel down to some folks that are not in compliance. And as you read through your own staff report here, three well owners are also are refusing to accept registered mailings. I mean, that's a blatant, okay, you know, okay, so we'll play the anti-government game, I guess, which a lot of us love to play. But we have, of the 13 property owners, you've got 5 that are aggressively realizing, oops, we made a mistake, and are trying to comply with getting them registered. We've got some that are refusing to do the letter. We've got one individual who didn't get their flow meter install the flow meter, but not until after the June 1st cutoff date of 2009, which actually is the 3rd time we rolled over that date when you go back to when we started the process. And so now that person is refusing to pay their civil penalties. And for those individuals that got their meters registered when they should have, got their meters flow tested when they should have, put on their meters when they should have, and are in compliance, I agree with Charlotte, it's fundamentally not fair that we've got folks on the fringe. I'm glad it's a relatively small number, but in fact, they're folks we're going to have to deal with. So if the process is, the 3 options that are available to us is we put a lien on the property, or we go to a collection, or we work with them if they're willing to work with us to get this solved, then I say we have to go down that road. We have to get on with the process. And the other day I saw a report that the federal government, you know, there's about $130 billion worth of uncollected taxes. Well, I don't want to pay my taxes either, but it's fundamentally unfair. I mean, we could spend more money just making the IRS solve some of our problems and pay for, it's a whole different issue. Anyway, I think that the message, if anybody who has been coming to these meetings consistently over the last 3 years, this board has bent over backwards to be fair and consistent and has ratcheted up the penalties in a logical, fair sequence after a public hearing process, and we still have people that are not in compliance. We have still people that are refusing to pay who haven't even reported their usage for all these years, and now they're complaining about flow meters. And they haven't even reported their usage. I mean, we're so far off base on some of these folks, we need to bring them into compliance. If we have a case where some wells are being carried on the books that are not valid, then we need to have people deal with staff and staff to deal with that. On my own property, I have 2 wells that are still currently carried with state well numbers, but destroyed or abandoned, and properly so, and we filed the paperwork. So we only pay on 1 well, and we went through the process, and it's expensive to abandon a well, but we had to do it. We abandoned another well and re-drilled. So I can see where there could be some state well numbers that are out of date that need to be corrected, and again, in my own case, one of them was wrong, and I worked with the GMA staff about 4 years ago and we got it corrected. It still shows up on the statement, but it shows up correctly. So we can cover that problem. What I don't like is people that are late and then refuse because they're late to say, I don't owe you anything, when in fact they're not only late, but they're so far out of compliance with the intent of what we started 3 years ago. And then we have folks that refuse to receive the mailings. So I think, at least from my standpoint, that we ought to use all the tools that are available. If the city of Camarillo uses a collection agency to collect, then that's good. And John will recall when he was on city council, they do the same thing. We have code enforcement, and people try to all kinds of things in their backyard, and we got to follow up on the procedures. So, yeah.
Kind of on the counterpoint too, what I don't see is what are we going to do with the accumulated debt that they've already generated by failing to comply. You're talking on C, the new penalty structure, but in fact these people have been in violation for some time now, and we had certain dates that we published and advertised. So I would hope that we hold those that ultimately fit the category that Chairman Mulhart is describing, and totally scufflaws that are not going to comply. Then I'm all for going for their past debt and maybe their wife and kids, but still.
And their dog.
Their dog, okay. But I just want the back door that if you find somebody who still has a legitimate discussion that we haven't properly taken care of, then we have the opportunity to do that, But for the ones who are truly fitting Chairman Mulhart's category, then I think there's the time to close the doors here.
Okay.
I think, and I think Mike makes a great point. My direction to staff, if the board will concur, is we use all the aggressive tools we can, and in the process, we have been fair and reasonable over the years to bring people in compliance. We don't particularly want the money, we need the numbers, and we need compliance. And we threw out the money as a way to get it done, and for those that have blatantly violated it, we're going to collect the money. If we have oddball cases where there are folks that have some really great stories, and there's always the opportunity to bring that individual case before the board, and we'll make that decision. But I don't want people to believe that they can keep ignoring us, come back 3 years from now and say, okay, I'm willing to pay. It's not going to work that way.
Mr. Chair, with that, I've noticed here that they have a 30-day, 90-day, and 120-day. Do we give them if this ordinance happens, another timeline that they get from this date to this date to comply, and then you go to 8-4?
No, my sense right now.
Or is it an immediate thing?
Yeah, my sense is we've worked this problem.
This is existing. Okay.
Yeah, we've worked this problem over the last 3 years in a number of ways, and now we're down to a very narrow group that needs to be dealt with. I think we have enough tools in our staff to be able to solve these problems. And if it means we have to get a lien on the property or file a civil action in court to get our money, then we're going to have to take that step.
One other, in the private sector, another avenue which we found very effective. The district attorney, if he finds somebody who has a group of bad debts, they accept our bad debts if we have not turned into a collection agency. If it's been once turned over to a collection agency, then the district attorney's fraud unit does no longer want to get those. So you might check and see before you start sending out collection agency whether there's anybody here who suits a category that would be able to be chased by the district attorney's office, which does this very effectively for my business.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Dave, anything on this? Okay.
Do we need a motion?
Hold on a second before we do that. Anybody in the audience want to speak to this issue?
Good afternoon. I'm John Matthews, here on behalf of three of the individuals that are represented by lawyers. I want to take each one separately. First of all, Rick and staff have been very cooperative in trying to deal with these issues. These are not issues where the individuals are not saying they got the mail, and these are not situations where the people are not metered. Well, in one case they are, and I'll go to that one first. The first one is a mutual water company that is presently unmetered. And as we all know, basically what that does is people have a tendency to not to look closely at what their water usage is. So we discussed with Rick and just recently got to Rick a letter that we sent to all the people in the mutual saying that we're going to start a program where we're going to start to meter them. It's a substantial amount of money for this mutual, and we were hoping, and Rick can comment on this if you'd like, we'd use something along the model of the Strickland Mutual Water Company type situation, where we would utilize the little bit of money they have. They have to go out and get some additional funding to put these people on meters over a period of time. It's an island acres, which is, again, a low-income area. So this is not a situation where these people don't know that they have a problem. They had a situation with the board where certain board members said, well, let's just pay the penalties, and let's just do that ad infinitum. We'll just raise our rates and pay the penalties. And Dave Sosa and I basically were able to convince them, from a water standpoint, that really isn't the best way to do things. You really ought to be looking at the health of the aquifers. So I would ask the forbearance on the board before any action is taken on that one, and at least we give this an opportunity to come back to your board to see whether or not this type of package would work for the board on those situations. The other two are interrelated.
John, do you want to, before you jump to the other one, let's talk for a second here on this one. Mm-hmm. You've asked the board to essentially give you and staff and your client time to try to work out an agreement to solve this problem.
That's what I'm asking. Okay. And Rick has done that. I mean, Rick has been willing to work with us.
Are you okay with that?
That's correct. It's one of the letters for the Island Acres Mutual. It's one of the letters that's attached.
Okay, but are you okay with that direction that he's asking for?
Yeah, it's coming back February.
With no, I mean, you guys may say, no, we don't agree with that, and then we look at something else, but at least give us the opportunity to see if that is a feasible model.
All right. Well, let me ask the question. Any member have any trouble with giving the time to bring it back to some kind of agreement that we can look at next month?
I was just wondering what your horizon is. Do you think it's going to be 30 days or 60 or?
To put the meters in?
Well, yeah, some resolution that it will come to an end.
No, we're going to put the meters in. I don't know, David. Yeah, I don't know that we have a 30-day horizon, to be honest.
That's one of the questions I was asking. Okay. Is that for Strickland also? Excuse me, Mr.
Yes. Yeah, go.
Well, Strickland, I think, is already, as I understand.
Strickland, we resolved that at another board meeting.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
This is a different one.
Supervisor Zaragoza, we were just going to try and see if we could utilize the Strickland model as a way to handle this one. Okay. But it may be, to be honest with you, Dr. Kelly, I believe it would be more than 30 days before you're going to have to go out. We've gotten a bid on a third of the meters, in essence, right now. What we've done is we're going to...
John, let me interrupt for a second. Let's change the question to the board. Are you folks okay with giving John and his client and staff time to work through this to some point where Jeff says to us, we're done, it's not going anywhere?
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know if that's 30 days, 45 days, or 60 days, but as long as John is working the problem with staff, are you okay with that? So
isn't that what this whole direction would be? Right. Have staff work with all of these people in one way or another, and that would be the way they'd be working with these people, and they're going to bring it back in February.
And Mr. Chair, the question to John, how much time do you think you need with that?
Dave, what do you think?
Well,
this is our general manager.
Dave Souza, I'm president of the Island Board, and Strickland had 100 meters, and they've been given a year time frame to get everything installed, and we've got about 300. And like everybody knows, this is a really low-income area, so I'm open to anything the board will allow us to have. I mean, we're kind of up against the wall. We're looking at a $90,000 surcharge for overpumping.
But that's all part of the discussion at February. Is that what's going to be coming back in February? I mean, this isn't on the agenda today.
No,
we don't have information on it.
That would be brought to the board at a later date.
Listen, I don't expect to solve this problem today. I'm just trying to give. John asked, would we give some forbearance while they work the problem? And my question to the members, are you prepared to give some time frame, some reasonable time frame to staff or direction? I think it's consistent with what Charlotte said. As long as we're working these problems, that's what the direction of the board is, and I think that's the direction that we can give you.
That's all we could ask for.
And you want compliance?
That's more than
I want compliance, and I understand it's going to take some time. We gave a lot of patience to Strickland to get this problem solved. I'm pleased that you and Dave are working this problem. I think it will get solved because you guys are involved, and as long as we see progress, let's keep pushing that ball. Are you guys okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
The other
all
two,
right.
just to bring up to speed, and they may not be, one I think is going to be much easier to solve, involves what I think the client did was not properly report. He has a suite of wells, and one well is way over the allocation, and therefore he has built up, substantial surcharges. When I've looked at it, the other wells are actually building up credits. So over the years, he's had these credits building up, and he's had these surcharges building up, and from my take, he's basically just ignored it, not done anything about it. I would make a commitment to the board that if that's not solved within 30 days, then you guys are at your own devices to send it to a collection agency or whatever. But I told Rick earlier today that within a week or so, we should have, I think, clean paperwork where you can see where we're asking for a transfer of some of those credits to alleviate those.
He's a common operator?
It's a common operator.
Okay, all right.
Right.
The ordinance allows for that.
Right. The third one is more difficult, and is one that may end up where we actually do a little arm wrestling on. It's a situation where there is no allocation. We've spent a substantial amount of time looking at United's records and the county's records, and some documents that went between the client and the previous CEO of the district, and that one is going to be a little more problematic, to be honest with you.
Okay.
So,
all right. I think the direction of the board is consistent with what staff is asking.
Right.
That we have to solve these problems, and obviously going to take a lot of staff time. Those individuals that are not even willing to deal with us on these issues, we're going to have to use the other means of the court or the collection agency or the DA as appropriate. But as long as we're moving forward on these, and staff says we're making progress, and that's their recommendation for us to keep along that line, I think we can do that.
Great, thank you. We clearly received the notices. I think, none of my clients have said, gee, we didn't get the notice, or we didn't,
Okay.
And staff, again, when we brought this up, they were right there, they met with us, and they've been very cooperative in helping us at least try and fashion some type of a solution to these.
Okay, all right, thanks, John. Okay. Anybody else have public comments on this issue? Do we need to make this as a motion or simply direction to staff? I don't see a motion here. It's just direction to staff on how to deal with this. That's all they're asking for. Okay, staff understand, the board understand what the direction is. Everybody okay with that? Okay, all right, let's go to the next item.
Afternoon, Chair Mulhart, directors. For the record, Brian Bondi with United Water and the GMA. By the way, Happy New Year.
Oh, Brian, I apologize. Let me interrupt for just one item that I meant to do earlier, and I didn't. Bob Aranio is sitting in the audience, and I meant to say something. One, he created this well testing problem we have, but anyway, Bob was just elected to the president of United Water, and I want to congratulate him for that position. So just for everybody to know that. Okay? There we go. Thanks, Brian. Excuse me. I made a note here and I didn't see it earlier.
No problem.
Need new glasses.
Excuse my frogginess. We'll try and work through this here. Item 6 is titled Proposed Resolution number 2010-01. And what I want to do today is go through and give you a review and update. This is a follow-on to Resolution 2009-07, which your board adopted in October of 2009. I want to review a little bit of history on that and then proceed to a recommendation to adopt Resolution 2010-01. And Supervisor Zaragoza, if you weren't here for this, if you have questions, just go ahead and ask. But so in October 2009, your board adopted Resolution 2009-07, which basically involved a program by which United Water Conservation District in the city of Oxnard was going to make use of the Good Deed Credit Trust and historical allocations that they acquired from Vulcan Materials Company in connection with the acquisition of the Faro pits to facilitate the purchase of those pits for future recharge operations by selling supplemental water to the city. At the time, staff presented a draft resolution. During that meeting, the city offered an alternative resolution, as you may recall, citing some differences that ultimately were worked out. At the time, your board went ahead and adopted staff's version and directed us to work with the district and the city and bring a revised resolution if that's what the parties decided needed to be done. And that's indeed where we're at today. So the city, the district, staff, and agency staff have worked together to prepare the revised resolution, which will be considered today. Just in summary, the revised resolution is similar in its intent and purpose. There's no change there. This is all still about the program to sell supplemental water to facilitate the purchase of the property for future recharge operations. But there have been several changes in the nuts and bolts of the ordinance in terms of how things are actually implemented. As you might recall, the ordinance required the district to prepare what we're calling a monitoring and contingency plan, which basically would lay out a description of proposed impacts that might be possible or might occur as related to the additional pumping that would occur under the program. The plan would also identify monitoring measures to give early warning for those potential impacts, and then lastly list out a set of contingency actions that might be taken to mitigate those potential impacts. At the time, in Resolution 2009-07, that was something that was going to be submitted after its adoption. Staff would review it, make a finding of no net detriment to the basins, and recommend final approval of the program. What Resolution 2010-01 is attempting to do is to incorporate the plan into the resolution with a no net detriment finding and approval of the program as a whole. So nothing to be done afterwards, in other words. The second major change is related to the reporting associated with the monitoring program. You might recall that Resolution 2009-07 required periodic reporting by United. And what we've come to terms with here is that, that's really not a separate program, separate reporting document isn't really necessary because United's already doing adequate monitoring in the forebay and the plane, and they're preparing reports each year. So there's really it's not necessary to prepare a separate report. It's just extra work that we can already basically take a subset of United's annual report and we'll have what we need. The third primary change is related to the CEQA requirement for the additional pumping. That's been removed. There was also a requirement for the city to use the good deed credits before any of their other credits. That has been removed. The fifth change is related to on-site water use at the Faro and Rose properties. Both of those properties were obtained from Vulcan by United. There's a need for dust control, irrigation of perimeter vegetation and things of that nature. So United is requesting 80 acre feet per year for site maintenance in perpetuity. The sixth change is related to a pre-existing agricultural leasehold on the Faro property. This is somebody who farms strawberries, organic strawberry grower, who's operating on 20 acres in the frontage area of the Faro property, not in the pit itself, but the land between Vineyard Avenue and the pits. If you've driven by, you've probably seen it. I think the initial thinking by staff was that the district would allow the grower to finish their crop. They made a big investment, something on the order of $100,000 for this year's crop. But last week we found out that the grower owns an interest in one of the wells on the Faro property. So the relationship and the situation has become much more complex, and it's ultimately something that the district's board will probably need to weigh in on. So the bottom line is there may be some additional work to be done here, and your board may hear more on this in the future, potential changes to that aspect of the resolution. And lastly, not critical probably in terms of what the board's concerned with, but the recitals were reworded a little bit to make clear United's mission and so on and so forth. So now that the monitoring and contingency plan is incorporated in the proposed resolution, staff went ahead and reviewed that. And basically the plan, again, describes potential impacts both regionally and locally and identifies a monitoring program and contingency actions to mitigate those impacts. The regional impacts were evaluated by Dr. Steve Bachman, basically looking at the proposed additional pumping under the program, what impacts would there be, and the model predicts something on the order of a foot or two at the BMO wells that we track regularly. And so that's obviously a minor impact. Also, that impact would be temporary. In other words, the first wet year, we should see rebound of those water levels. Local impacts would be things like drawdown below historical levels at the pumping locations, interference with nearby private wells that might cause folks to need to lower their pumping bowls, and unexpected water quality changes. These impacts aren't anticipated. Both the city and the district have a long history of operations, and have monitored their operations closely and have been able to identify and deal with these issues in the past. Staff went ahead.
Brian, hold on a second.
Excuse me, on the local impacts. You said there was no CEQA required for the whole.
For the additional pumping, yes, that's what the parties came to agreement on.
Okay, but because of that, or even looking at that, there's no CEQA required regardless if the two agency wants it or not. Am I making sense on that?
I'm not understanding the question.
Okay, if we have some local impacts, okay, then there's no CEQA required then, is that what you're saying?
I think so. Gerhard, you may want to speak to that in more detail.
Well, I could speak to that. Traditionally, the agency hasn't asked for CEQA. Even if you don't expect impacts, you would still do a CEQA document. You do a determination, negative declaration, or mitigated negative declaration. That's something we're probably going to bring to your board in February as more and more pumpers propose essentially some impacts which considered by themselves may not in and of themselves be significant, but considered in context may have some input. And so your board may want to rethink the way we've approached this, the analysis of impacts in the past. But traditionally we haven't done it, and the deal was we're not going to start here, but we're going to be watching for them. Now, it's not your board that's at risk in that situation. It's the lead agency who makes the determination, and they run those risks, not your board, from that the legal perspective.
Okay.
Well, looks like I have a font issue here. Those aren't supposed to be A's. Those are supposed to be well symbols, but I think the point works anyways. There's 3 potential pumping locations: United's El Rio facility, the city's blending station number 3. There's a group of wells here, and the city's water yard. In review of the monitoring and contingency plan, staff looked at the locations of nearby private wells. This was a concern that Director Borchard raised at the last, or at the October board meeting. And it turns out that the nearest active well to the city's water yard is on the order of 4,000 feet away, and blending station number 3 is 1,600 feet away. We don't expect impacts at those distances. The upper aquifer system that most of these wells are installed in is very high transmissivity, doesn't lend itself to large cones of depression around pumping wells. So we think those distances are fairly safe. Now,
excuse me, Brian, what about at the United well yard?
Yes, and there are wells closer than those distances to United's facilities, but again, United has a really long history of operations there. They know how the system works. They're monitoring their wells very closely and other wells around it. So we feel comfortable that United's monitoring would be adequate to detect changes before they become problems. I also want to note that the city in United and the city's joint request for the first transfer of credits under this program noted that they intend to take the bulk, if not all, of the water at the city's water yard here. And this is the location where the nearest well is 4,000 feet away. So this offers the most safety with respect to local concerns about affecting local pumpers. The contingency plan that is offered, basically what the strategy would be is to shift the pumping between these three facilities to minimize local impacts at any single one facility. So that's a strategy that would be taken if the monitoring suggests that something needs to be changed. So in summary, proposed resolution 2010-01 is, again, identical in its purpose and intent. The critical differences with resolution 2009-07, again, is the incorporation of the monitoring and contingency plan directly into the resolution, which also means that with adoption of the resolution, we're making a finding of no net detriment to the basins and approval of the program. We've simplified the reporting requirements to basically just be a subset of United's annual reporting. The CEQA, as we talked about, was removed, and we've added provisions for limited on-site water use for both site maintenance in perpetuity and, at least for 2010, the pre-existing ag lease hold on the Farrow property. Based on our review, staff's review of the contingency plan, we think it sufficiently protects against local and regional impacts. We support the reporting program, and we support a finding of no net detriment, and we recommend adopting resolution 2010-01.
Okay, any members have any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you're the one to answer this question or not, Brian, but in this MCP, monitoring and contingency plan, in the section that says mitigation of potential effects, it says here, there is no method to mitigate this transient effect as it occurs. And I guess I understand why that statement's there. And you said you were going to try and shift the pumping between the three different locations. But in the outside case that local wells do drop, and people are caused to lower their bowls, that's a pretty significant expense. Pulling a well and adding pipe is not a small deal, and it takes you out of production for a while. So I would suggest that a mitigation might be to assist those affected wells to help lower their bowls. And I'm wondering what you think of that idea.
Well, I think I heard two questions in there. The first part about the temporary and transient effects is related to the regional impacts. That's the 2 feet at the BMO wells along the coast that we talked about. That's a temporary effect regionally, and with the first wet year with substantial recharge, we expect that effect to be mitigated. So there's no way of mitigating that regional impact until we have a wet year, if you will. Regarding the local impacts and the potential, this idea of financial support for lowering bowls, I think the strategy, and I'm kind of speaking for the city and United, but I think the strategy is to prevent it from ever getting to that point through the monitoring plan and through the contingency actions of shifting the pumping around so that we spread it so that we don't affect a nearby pumper, say at Del Rio or the one that's 1,600 feet away from Blended.
So can I hear someone from United and Oxnard say that?
Mike Solomon, United Water. Like I said, we have tried to plan this and spread it out so that there is no impact. We will be shifting around. We'll be watching closely. Steve will be watching closely. But I would want to remind the board that the use of the Good Deed Credit Trust, the bigger portion of this, was new water we put in the ground. That water wouldn't have been there if we had brought in state water. So those bowls technically would be lower, and so this isn't just a pumping of credits because we didn't use an allocation. It was new water we put in there. So just as a reminder of that.
You make a good point. Nevertheless,
yeah,
you have potentials of private landowners incurring some significant cost. And I support your project, and I support the concept of moving the pumping around. So I guess I want to hear from somebody who's actually going to be running the project that we'll be monitoring and making sure that doesn't happen.
I think, Steve, you'll have to answer that because you did the modeling on that one.
Mike, before you leave, if you would, so let's say Steve's prognostications turn out to not necessarily be fulfilled, and you lower the water table inadvertently or on purpose. What about the private landowner who now has to lower his bells because of your actions?
That's obviously that's an item I got to take to my board and ask them. We looked at it. We didn't see it as an impact, so we didn't discuss that item. But that's something I have to take to the board.
Okay. Let's. If the actions that the city and United take cause damage such that there's a liability associated with that damage, there are recourses for everybody to take. And it may be through the court process or pack this room with a whole bunch, or pack United's room with a whole bunch of folks. So I'm not sure that, and interesting enough, if you look in these 3 wells, my well happens to be right smack dab in the middle of the 3 wells. So I'm one of the guys. In fact, I believe your plot is wrong. I believe the Oxnard blending station is at the corner of Gonzales and Rose. That's not what the map shows. This map shows it's at the corner of Rose and Rice. So if you slide it over to where it is, it's less than 1,400 feet from my well, and so I'm the guy that gets impacted. Thank you very much with your question. So I guess from my standpoint is, I'm not sure that United or the city, I don't know if any of us can give the kind of quote-unquote guarantee that we want, other than if United and the city destroy my well in the process, I will lead the charge of litigation to get recourse. And that is what we'd all do if somebody across our field does something to damage us. We'd all do that process. And so I guess what I'm saying as a United director and as one of the wells that's going to be right smack dab in the triangle here is don't screw up in this process, because I don't want to sue United and I don't want to have to abstain from the vote that says to sue you guys.
Yeah, and it's understood. We take in Oxnard, I think I can speak for them because I've talked to Ken several times. We certainly, even in our agreement, talked about there is no plan, we are not going to impact. If we start seeing an impact, we're going to back off and rethink this and follow some new plans. But just a reminder, this is a huge pumping area, 11,000 acre feet.
You just said what I wanted you to say, so thank you.
It's a drop in the bucket.
No, it's nothing funny, because what you're asking is for local farmers to approve the project, and if by some off reason all the calculations are incorrect, we have recourse. Yeah, let's go hire a bunch of lawyers. That's not a good suggestion. So I'm counting on the fact that you're going to be managing the project appropriately and not be dropping water levels. And this is really a big thing for the entire area. It's an important project. You're going to be able to take storm flows. You mentioned all those possibilities. So I support the whole concept. But you've got to be cognizant of the local wells and making sure they don't drop.
Right. The city of Oxnard understands that if something happens, they can't use the water for a while. And that was part of the changes we wanted to make with the resolution too. There has to be a little flexibility in case we have to do that, and they have to move a little pumping to a following year when it's better to do. That's all we were trying to do.
As a complete sidebar, I've directed Mike, and I've had conversations with Ken Ortega. I've had long conversations with Jeff. And I think part of tomorrow's meeting is the starting of the process to make sure that the volume of pumping that we're going to do as part of the transition from the city of Oxnard's current operation to eventually the GREAT program, we've never done that kind of pumping pattern. When we created Ordinance 5 and now Ordinance 8, we never envisioned that we would have that kind of volume of pumping. And I told Ken, I told Jeff, and I told Mike, I support the city's right to use their credits. I also reserve the right to say to the city, you got to stop your pumping because it has impacts that we did not anticipate. No different than if my neighbor decided to run his well up to the ceiling and suck my well dry, I have the right to put a stop to that. So I think the city understands, I know the GMA understands, Mike understands, and that's part of what this meeting tomorrow is all about at United's offices, to deal with the pumping process. What's the protocol going to be? What are the trigger points going to be? Steve's going to have a big job to make sure he's on top and his staff is on top of the pumping patterns so that we have the triggering mechanisms at a very low level so we don't get into the problem you address. So it is being treated seriously. And as I said, I don't think United or the city can quote-unquote guarantees, but there's so much liability. If you screw this up, it's not cost-effective for any of us. And
By the way, you and me will be partners in that litigation, because I'm across the street from the well field.
there you go. So we'll be there too.
I think,
Again, remember, I just remember also what our mission is to protect those aquifers. This was a fiscal way to make an important long-term project happen, but our mission of protecting the aquifers is number one. So we're not going to abuse that.
if it makes you feel any less threatened, Don Kendall's challenged with the same issues in his extraction field. So.
Sure you did.
Mr. Chair, do we have, who's here from the city of Oxnard represented? Maybe, I'm sure that the city, is also aware of that, and Ken Ortega,
Again, Rob Saperstein for the City of Oxnard. I think Director Borchard said he heard what he needed to hear. The city and United are working fist and glove in making sure that the monitoring is done real time and that we have the capability of, at a flick of a switch, turning on and off wells when there's concern. So,
Rob, and also on your map here, the blending station number 3, is that the one that's on Wankel Way in Solar, and then there's another one in Rose and Gonzales?
blending station number 3 is the new,
The Wankel
close
Way.
to the Mulhart, closer to the Mulhart property.
Right close to the,
And blending station 1 is the water yard.
yeah,
The one on Rose and Gonzales is right there in the corner by
by Shell Station.
the Shell
That's
station.
correct.
And this is on Wankel Way by the Board of Realtors.
Blending station number 3. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So is this one right?
There's two. There's one in Gonzales and
No, there's no wells.
Rose, and then the one in Wankel Way by the Board of Realtors and Solar.
On Solar is the
The new
relocated
one.
blending
Exactly
station.
right.
That's correct.
Just to-
Oh, okay.
The old station by the
No longer.
Shell station by
It just so-
doesn't exist
It
anymore.
just so happens, because of the angles, all you've done is moved it 90 degrees
That's right.
to my bearing.
That's right.
So
It's a different radius, but
yeah, you just shifted from the left side of my pump to the right side. So
That's correct.
All right. I think we've had a good discussion. Unless members have any more, what we're doing is we're responding to the questions that the board raised when we drafted this resolution back in October. We're doing the cleanup. There was a number of concerns about a lot of these issues, and members had a lot of questions at the time. Staff has met with the appropriate agencies, and this is the cleanup. I support what you guys are doing. So,
Move to adopt Resolution 2010-1.
Second.
okay. Point of order here, Al. Does Charlotte need to say to rescind Resolution 2009-07 and adopt 2010-1, because we're rescinding one and adopting another? How do you want this done?
I think that's not necessary. The resolution itself rescinds the previous resolution, so I think a motion to adopt.
Okay, so we have a motion to adopt and a second. Any other questions? Okay, roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Zaragoza?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to number 7.
Bear with me. All right. Item, again, for the record, Brian Bondi, United Water, and Fox King and GMA. Item 7 is a returning item related to the expansion of use issue and the administrative hold on well permits. So I'll give you a brief review of where we've been on those topics and discuss recommendations we've received from SAG and some staff recommendations on this issue. As you may recall, at the September 2009 board meeting, your board heard concerns about the potential for expansion of groundwater use within the agency. At that meeting, your board made two directions: one to SAG to review the issue and make a policy recommendation back to the board. At that time, we were all anticipating that a potential outcome of that process might be a moratorium of some kind, similar nature to Emergency Ordinance D. And so your board also directed staff to place an administrative hold on well permit applications for the parts of the agency that aren't under Emergency Ordinance D, basically everything except the Las Posas basins. So SAG went about its business. At the September SAG meeting, the group reached a consensus to move forward with drafting an ordinance to temporarily limit the potential for expansion of groundwater use, again, for all areas outside of the Las Posas basins. And the group formed an ad hoc committee to begin working on drafting language for that ordinance. The ad hoc committee met twice in October and began its work. One of the first things the group did was list out all the potential measures that might be necessary to try and limit the potential for expansion of groundwater use. Things that were on the table were things like moratoriums on new wells or replacement wells with greater capacity, moratoriums on baseline allocations, prohibition of irrigation on previously unirrigated land, allocation caps, and even some talk about potentially capping the use of credits in some form or fashion. There was quite a bit of discussion at the ad hoc meetings and the October and December SAG meetings. While going through the details, some of the members began to question what the group was trying to accomplish, basically asking the question, is there really enough risk for groundwater use to expand? Do we really need to do this? There could be some unintended consequences from going down the path of coming up with a comprehensive temporary moratorium to address expansion of use. Are we going to create potential conflicts or challenges to the agency's authority? And some members even questioned whether some of the ideas were even enforceable with the agency's authority. To make a long story short, the group ultimately re-examined the historical pumping patterns and came to the conclusion that it doesn't appear that has been a significant expansion of groundwater use, and the anecdotal evidence doesn't suggest that there's enough risk in the coming 2 to 3 years to justify a set of interim measures like we described earlier. Some members felt that certainly that was the case for the forebay. Others felt that perhaps something was indeed needed on an interim measure for the Pleasant Valley and Southeast Oxnard Plain basins. But part of the challenge for the group, though, was related to the attendance. We had very limited representation by folks from Pleasant Valley and the Southeastern Oxnard Plain. The pie graph shows, 20% or so of the attendance from that area. Really what that boils down to for a group of 12 to 15 people is 1 or 2. So really wasn't a lot of momentum there in terms of representation from that area to carry those ideas forward, at least from my perspective. So at the end of the day, in December, the SAG met again and developed a list of recommendations to bring back to your board. Obviously, the first one is to not move forward with a comprehensive temporary moratorium designed to prevent or limit the expansion of groundwater use. Instead, the group felt that the agency and its stakeholders should be focused on developing long-term measures. Some things that were cited during that discussion, obviously water supply, increasing water supply, recycled water projects, increasing water conservation, developing our basin-specific plans, and updating our ordinance to fix the loopholes that we've all talked about. The group also said that we need to stay focused on balancing supply and demand. We've heard that before. And lastly, the group felt that one of the measures that was discussed during the brainstorming sessions and with the ad hoc group has enough merit to consider further discussions as a potential temporary measure. I know that seems a bit contradictory, but this concept of a temporary allocation cap of some kind there was enough consensus to continue talking about that. So that's something that the group's recommending further discussion on. So staff review of SAG's recommendations, we basically concur with the stakeholder group's recommendations. We think that some of the long-term measures that were discussed are going to be a natural outcome of things we're already doing, like updating the ordinance code and developing basin-specific plans, and those projects like GRADE obviously have momentum of their own. And we also think that if some of those things don't happen, though, in a time frame, say on the order of 1 to 2 years, then maybe we need to reconsider some of the interim measures that were discussed. So the recommendation today is twofold. We're recommending that your board direct SAG to continue their discussions on a potential temporary allocation cap and to prepare a policy recommendation to bring back to the board. And secondly, because we're no longer anticipating a moratorium or an emergency ordinance, we're recommending that your board direct staff to remove the temporary administrative hold on well permits. Again, just for clarity, that pertains to the portions of the agency outside of the Las Posas Basin only. That would have no effect on emergency ordinance D.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Any members have any questions? Anybody in the audience have any questions? Okay. Correct me, to cancel the temporary moratorium, we did that as a resolution. We have to...
No, that was a minute order.
It was just
just direction to staff.
Okay, direction to staff. Okay, so so your recommendation is we tell staff don't do that. Go ahead, take that temporary. Okay.
Yes.
And the next item is except for the emergency D area. That's a special area. We don't want to do that. Las Posas. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we agree on that. And I'm okay with sending a recommendation to a possible temporary allocation cap to the SAG to deal with. As I read through this, based on what I've been told, and Steve is here and you are here to correct me if I'm wrong, and Rick is here, 4 doesn't work. If we all pumped at 4, we're broke. So my only fear of going down this road is that we send a false sense of hope to a lot of folks out there. Hey, the cap's at 4. What's the big deal?
Sure.
It doesn't work.
Mr. Chairman, to get to 4, you have to have one of the methods you've been using all these years. You either have an allocation or you have efficiency or something else.
Well, but Mike, my understanding is that even if we followed that procedure with the allocations and/or efficiency, if everybody was running right at that level, nurses, for example.
That's absolutely correct. My only, I strongly support this cap, and the reason I do is that we had here PhD type person who was prepared to prove to us that 12 acre-feet was efficient. And I'm not emotionally prepared to want to debate this issue with a PhD challenger. And I think the best way to keep the fox out of the house is to shut the door at 4 acre-feet. Below that, most everything that we have in this area can survive.
First of all, I believe I support the concept of having a debate to come up with a cap, okay? And if at the end of the debate 4 is the answer, then I will support that. I'm just throwing up a caution flag that even from a sustainability standpoint, I'm not sure 4 is the number that works. I think it has to be lower than that. And I don't know how we get there. And if 4 is the interim number that we come up with while we work our way to the correct number, and it stops the fox from getting into the hen house, I'm okay with that as well.
The problem we face is that there's a number of regular ag operations in the area that can bump to it, and that's multi-crop green leaf crops, the raspberries probably, the strawberries maybe not quite so much, but unless you're prepared to put a good number of acres out of business as currently done. I think that this is a reasonable temporary thing that we can later squeeze down, but we have to, put the lid on the cookie jar before it's empty.
Okay, and I read up there, and you said it, as long as we understand it may be a temporary allocation cap while we work ourselves through the other side of the equation, the supply side of the equation, then as long as we have that understanding, I'm okay with that. So.
Mr. Chair. I think my problem here is that my head's filled with a cold and I'm not able to wrap myself around all this, but what I'm having a hard time getting in is timing. We remove the hold on well applications, which is immediate. And then we're directing a group to prepare a policy for something temporary that will then come to us at a later date. So there's going to be a big gap. And I've seen us go 3-4 years on developing something that's temporary. So I'm having a problem time-wise. Can somebody fill me in on what is anticipated here?
Well, basically, when we first brought the expansion of use item before your board, that was in September, so we've now transpired, 4 or 5 months. I think that the process of debating the temporary allocation cap would be on the same order of amount of time, or maybe even sooner, because there's already been quite a bit of discussion at the SAG about this very issue, so it's not a new item for them to discuss. So my gut sense is this is something that's a 2-3 meeting type topic.
I guess my sense is that a discussion where people can say, oh yeah, we need to recommend a possible temporary allocation cap, and coming to an agreement on that is one thing. Coming to an agreement on the cap is something else altogether again.
The number, yeah.
And so
well, I share Charlotte's concern, because the typical way we have historically operated is we stretch it out, and we've done that successfully for a lot of good reasons. This item, I think, is an item that we need to get resolved, and as long as we understand that if we get some number in place, that we have the right to change that number based on new information or experience. And as long as we have that understanding, and that number could go up, it could go down. My sense is it'll probably have to go down, and people need to understand that. And but in the meantime, it's better to have a cap than a totally open scenario that we have now, and with some of the production that could take place with a totally open-ended scenario is definitely not healthy for the aquifer, and 4 is better than that total open-ended scenario. So I would say having the SAG, that is the appropriate forum that we created to deal with this issue. We need to deal with it. We need to lean on TAG to figure out the technical merits of what they're talking about. And if, in fact, the number that SAG comes up with does not pass some kind of technical analysis down the road, we reserve the right to adjust that number based on new information. And as long as we understand those are the parameters, I think we'll be okay.
It seems to me that we've existed for quite a long time now with no cap at all, and we haven't seen the entire world put hoops or vertical integrated greenhouse that they bought one of Bud Smith's old buildings and made a greenhouse out of it. So it's just the unusual event is what I see for it. I need to bring here, I finally dug up the articles from the Edwards Aquifer in Texas, where ultimately to stop it, the city of San Antonio had to buy the well that was the egregious violator. But if we can just avoid some silly scenario like that, is what I see.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Just from my understanding, because I haven't been around it, the 4 acre foot allocation, you said if everybody used it, there's not enough.
No. It's not an allocation.
Or the
I'll see if I can explain, make sure I understand it. If you have a historical allocation, let's say it happens to be 3, and you decide you want to grow something, the most you can pump is 4. Okay. I haven't changed your allocation. I just said I've capped it at 4. If you're an efficient irrigator and whatever you're growing that year, even at efficiently takes 6 acres, you've exceeded the cap. You have to do your operation and not exceed.
Within the 4.
Within that 4. That's the cap.
Okay.
Right. Brian, did I say that correctly?
Yes.
So, we're not, thank you. We're not changing allocation. We're not changing efficiency. We're just saying even the most the max. Even the most efficient guy in the world wants to grow rice in the middle of the Oxnard Plain as efficiently as he can.
You've got 4.
He's got 4. We're not going to turn this into a rice.
Mr. Chairman, my imagination is that includes accumulated historicals. I mean, if you wanted to use your 6 acre feet and you had enough of historical to go ahead and pay for the 6 acre feet, you couldn't do it because now you've exceeded
Because if you
the
use
4
2
acre
one
feet.
year and you got 2 left, there's no carryover.
That you just when you're beyond 4, you're beyond 4 by definition. Is the end start paying the penalty?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. All right. So not everybody understands. So my sense from listening to the members is to go with staff's recommendation. That's what I'm hearing. You're hearing the same thing, Jeff? Okay. Anybody in the audience? Sam is putting up his hand. Okay. All this, what we agreed to, is just gone through the ceiling because Sam's going to change us. Here we go.
Sam McIntyre, Burwood Water. Kind of put the cart before the horse. I think you need to develop this information on a crop basis before you change the cap, because there are crops that are taking 3 1/4 acre feet, and if you make it a cap now, cap it at 4 acre feet now, I really think the research should be done, and it's being done now by, I understand, the university and also by our local farm advisor, as to what actual crops do, so you don't leave a grower hanging out and saying, maybe I've got an intern crop planted that's a 3-year crop, all of a sudden I don't have the water for it.
I think Sam, I think what you raise is an excellent discussion point at the SAG, that if they come up with X number, they need to have some scenarios. How does it work with that number? And it may be that what you're going to have to do is come back with, I don't know, 2 or 3 I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I think the question you raise is a valid question, and it means that when you go to the SAG meeting and when you deal with this issue, that's the time and place you need to raise that issue, because if the model we create, one size fits all, doesn't meet our needs, we need to make the adjustment there before you bring it back.
I think we muddied the waters here. We started talking about a numerical cap. We're not adopting that today, and we're not talking about adopting that today. We're talking about telling the SAG to develop one, and they substituted a number in there as if we were going to be adopting that today. And my question had been, we're getting rid of the moratorium, and we don't have a cap in the meantime.
And the reason I'm the one that introduced the number 4, and somewhere here in the staff report it talked about the members thought 4 was the number. That's how 4 came about.
Yeah.
You raise a valid question, and it may be the SAG's got to figure out how to come up with a temporary allocation cap. I don't know what the mechanism is, and I don't know what the number is, but that SAG's got to come up with that.
Tomorrow at 1 o'clock is this next SAG meeting.
Okay. Anybody else? Thanks, Sam. Anybody else? Okay. It's direction to staff. I don't think it requires a roll call or a motion. It's just direction to staff. Or what do you want?
Well, we voted to have a moratorium.
Yeah, well, we're lifting of the administrative hold.
I move we adopt staff's recommendations as written.
Okay, there's the motion. And a second? Okay, a roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Zaragoza? Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, number 8.
Okay, again, for the record, Brian Bondi with United Water and Fox Canyon GMA. Item 8 is proposed ordinance 8.2. Let me briefly review where we've been on the ordinance update project, discuss stakeholder outreach efforts and comments that we've received on draft ordinance 8.2, and make a recommendation to initiate a public hearing and potential adoption of ordinance 8.2. So as you probably recall, at the September 2009 board meeting, staff presented a list of 13 potential ordinance update topics, and your board directed staff to group those and bring them as multiple separate updates to the ordinance, and to do 2 readings of each ordinance update. In December, we came back and provided you an update on our topic list and informed you that we had grouped all of the relatively low difficulty or simple updates, if you will, and had prepared and provided you with a draft ordinance 8.2, and a first reading of that ordinance was conducted at that meeting. Your board directed staff to schedule a public hearing for January, today's board meeting, for the second reading and potential adoption of ordinance 8.2. Again, this table may look familiar. This is our tracking tool for the ordinance updates. You can see that the items that are shaded, items 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, are the ones that are being incorporated into the ordinance 8.2. And again, these are all the relatively low difficulty items, mostly number 1s, which indicated a low level of difficulty. As a reminder, the scope of the this first ordinance update, ordinance 8.2, includes minor edits. That's global throughout the entire ordinance, fixing things like typos, adding additional language for clarity, basically edits that don't change the meaning of the ordinance, but just make it perhaps more readable or understandable. We've updated the definition of groundwater basin boundaries to fix some of the issues that we've talked about at past board meetings related to language that describes adopted maps that haven't been adopted and recorded and things of that nature. We're proposing to update sections of the ordinance to add a requirement for 30-day notification whenever there's a change in owner or operator of a well. That's something that we feel, if in place, will help prevent some of the issues that Rick described that we've been tackling over the past year, prevent those in the future, or help limit them by knowing who's operating a well and owning it, and having that changes reported in a timely manner. Similarly, we're proposing a 30-day requirement or time frame for registering wells after they've been drilled. Similar idea there. Want to know when those wells are coming online and who owns them and operates them, and so on and so forth. Lastly, we have modified a number of definitions in the ordinance. In the Chapter 1 has the definitions. We've added 6 new definitions for terms in the ordinance that were previously undefined that we felt the stakeholders could benefit by having definitions for those terms, and 1 definition was removed that was unnecessary. Stakeholder outreach. Just want to note the actions that staff have taken to encourage and promote stakeholder feedback on draft ordinance 8.2. At the December board meeting, we held the first reading. That was something that's a courtesy. The enacting legislation doesn't actually require 2 readings. We also solicited comments from the stakeholders, written comments. At the SAG meeting on the following day in December, we provided copies of the draft ordinance to the members that were present and gave an overview of the differences between 8.2 and 8.1. We also mailed this postcard, which you see pictured here, to all registered operators within the GMA. Basically, the card notifies them that the draft ordinance is being considered and solicits their comments by the deadline. We also posted the draft ordinance on our agency's website, and we did the required public notices. Comments received on draft ordinance 8.2. We received 30 comments from 3 different stakeholders. Roughly 2/3 of those comments were wording changes, editorial in nature, not affecting the meaning or intent of the ordinance. Most of those we just accepted and went ahead and made the actual edit in the document. Felt they were good recommendations. Roughly the remaining third of the comments were either questions or things that weren't applicable to the current set of things that we're changing in the ordinance, or were comments on issues that we're already planning on bringing in future updates. So in summary, there was really no significant content change to the version that you saw in December. So in summary, we had our first reading in December. We've encouraged, gone above and beyond to encourage stakeholder feedback. We received a small volume of comments, largely editorial. We've addressed those, and there's no substantial changes to the ordinance. So therefore, we recommend commencing a public hearing and considering adoption of ordinance number 8.2.
Okay. Al, is it appropriate to open up the public hearing before I hear board discussion, or should I hear some board questions first? What sequence do you want me to follow?
You would open the hearing, close the hearing, and then bring it back to the board for discussion.
And the appropriate wording then is I now open for public hearing on the adoption of changes to ordinance number 8.2. Is that correct? Okay. Public hearing is open. Anybody have any comments? What's that music that they play on Jeopardy? Well,
No, just close it.
No, I need that music. Okay, contestants, time is up. Okay. Rob, this is a chance. Come on, give me a break. I mean, geez.
Oh, come on, give us a break. Just close it.
So do I need a motion to close the public hearing?
You as chair.
Okay, all right. I now close the public comment period for ordinance 8.2. All right, with that, members, you have any questions? I'm hearing no questions. I read through, as one of the, as Rob and John will attest, we sat through when we drafted the original stuff in here. I'm amazed we got so many changes so fast. Somehow we didn't do it right. I guess maybe that's the answer, because it took us a long time to get the basics. But anyway.
This is the easiest.
Oh, yes, compared to what we had to go through. Anyway.
You did such a good job.
Yeah. Second of all, I think somebody at the last meeting wanted a red line copy, and for those in the audience, the board did get a red line copy, so thank you to staff, because it sure made reading a lot easier than before. I am pleased that we have taken a very methodical, disciplined approach to solving, these items. We've got some others that we'll deal with down the road, but in this case, I think we've done it correctly. We've gotten input from the stakeholders. We've had public hearings on it. It is our working document, and it's a massive amount of cleanup that was taken on by staff, and I compliment you folks for doing that. And I think we did it right, and we'll do the next cycle when that's appropriate. So with that, I need a motion to adopt. Oh, you have a question?
No, a comment. You haven't asked for comments yet.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate the red line draft, because I really find it easier to go through that than something that's all just here's what we used to have and here's what we have, and put it together yourself. I also think that we made the right decision some time ago when we decided to take this in a phased approach, because it's a lot easier to digest, and the other things will be more difficult as they come up. And so with that, I would move the adoption of ordinance number, the introduction, the adoption of ordinance number 8.2.
Okay, I have a motion.
I'll second that.
And a second. Any other questions, comments? Roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Zaragoza?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Brian. And you did a great job. Rick, you guys did a great
You
job.
feel better too, Brian.
Yeah, I hope you feel better.
Don't worry, I'm not contagious. It's just allergies.
Yeah, that's the famous last words. Yeah. I want everybody in this room to shake his hand before you leave, and we'll test this theory very quickly. Charlotte's the same boat. So,
This is my third week of this.
Oh, my goodness. Hey, we have an executive officer's report. Anybody have any questions? All right. So I'll assume that everybody wants to receive and file. Can we do that?
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else have anything? GMA issues? Staff? Jeff? Anybody?
I had one thing that I guess should have been brought up during board member comments, but I believe David and our terms are up next month. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. I think I was just re-upped last year.
Well, there are two of us who are up. I thought you and I were in a cycle. But maybe not. And the list came out, the reason I was bringing it up, the list came out for the mayors and the city selection committee, and this wasn't on it. And they're meeting right away, so it's hard to get a quorum at those meetings. Maybe they need to be notified.
Director Craven, you're correct according to the roster at the back of the agenda package that yours and Director Borchard's terms are expiring next month.
Time flies when we're having fun, David.
And the mayors?
The city selection committee is the mayors.
Yeah. Okay, all right, very good. Just one last item. I mentioned Bob as the United president. Dan has been sitting there quietly. Make sure you show that he was here as an alternate. Dan has been elected as vice president, and I have agreed and been appointed as secretary treasurer. So my cycle starts all over again. So the three of us, the executive committee was here today, effectively. So for what that's worth.
Miranda, if you would be sure and get in the minutes some of the language that Mike Solomon used in his promises to Director Borchard.
You notice the executive committee, I'm the low man on the totem pole. Nobody else agreed to what I said, so we're safe, I think. Hey, anything else? Dr. Bachman has informed me that he guarantees that we'll be above normal, right? Director Orr at the United Board guaranteed that this year that the San Felice will spill. So we are on our way. I just want you to know. So anyway, anybody have anything before I go? Meeting's adjourned. Thanks.
Oh, I'm feeling so much